a section where she's meeting Socrates, kind of falling in love with Socrates. Then we have a description of the marriage to Socrates, and then we come to the kernel of the poem. So, but I would say there's an episode that is really the most important thing in there. So everything is a turning point, and it tells us a lot about Xantippe, but also about Socrates. And here we have a spilling of wine, which is not exactly as we've seen in the picture, but Amy Levy is playing, I think, with this idea, this kind of anecdote or kind of legend of Xantippe spilling some sort of liquid over Socrates or close to Socrates. And then we move on to a section about despair and domesticity. So I think this is also very interesting to look at. We're going to do that in a second. And then we're nearing the end of both the poem and also Xantippe's life, where she starts reflecting on death and also on Socrates' suicide. As you know, Socrates killed himself by drinking hemlock in order to not get punished by the authorities. And the last couple of lines, I could not come up with, or did not want to come up with some sort of title or suggestion or kind of summary. But I've just put down the first line of these last couple of lines, which is the dawn has come, which is also kind of linking back to the beginning. And I would very much like to know what you are making out of that. And I think I'm going to stop the presentation now so we can actually look at the poem together. And as I say, what I would like to do is moving through the poem. I've picked out some passages I think are worthwhile looking at closer and also talking about them in more detail. So Xantippe, a fragment. I hope you had a chance to look at the poem, and I know I sent it in very late because there was lots of things to do and I didn't get around it. Anyone who had the chance to look at it, how do we start? How do we start out? So we've got Xantippe saying, "What have I waked again? I never thought to see the rosy dawn or even this grey dull solemn stillness ere the dawn has come." So how could we perhaps describe that? So I would say it's very much in medias res. And we have the situation that Xantippe seems to wake up. However, she's not, I think, kind of jumping out of bed, looking forward to a new day, but the day is grey and dull, and she has this weird or potentially weird astonishment about the fact that she actually woke up. So I think we get into a scene where we have a woman who thought she was dead, who expected to not wake up at this time. I think we're also not quite sure whether it is because she's just very old, therefore expecting to die every second now, whether she's ill, or indeed whether she has tried to commit suicide. So maybe it's not even the night she has slept through, but maybe she was unconscious. So a beginning in medias res that very much sets the scene for a poem or a longer text about questions of death, of power. Here one might even kind of, I might be jumping ahead, but it's kind of failure. So she didn't even achieve the death she has been longing for. And she addresses, as I said, a group of maidens who might have been her servants or something similar. And as she awakens, we get a reference to her bad reputation. So she says, well, to the maidens, well, you have slept and you shouldn't have slept so soundly because you were supposed to take care of me. And she says, that's line 9, nay, I would not chide. Oft have I chidden, yet I would not chide in this last hour. So she's taking the thing she's known of and says deliberately, yeah, you expect me to chide you and to get upset and tell you that you did your job wrong, but I won't. So I refuse to do that. And then she refers to her last hour. And as we move on, I think I will talk a lot about how this poem deals with the question of agency and what can one do, and especially here, what can a woman do? So when can she choose to be, like, you know, be somebody or something, and when is she forced to take on a certain role that society, or later we'll see also her husband, expects from her. I've already mentioned, so it also says in this couple of lines, it's her last hour. And I think this is very interesting because as we move through the poem, we get a sense, and especially at the end when the whole thing comes round again, that ironically it's in the hour of her death, or that she expects to die, that she takes on power that she hasn't had for, what's the last decades, I don't know. But it is her very last hour where she can speak for herself, and by using the dramatic monologue can also tell us, can tell the reader about how she experienced her life, apart from this discourse of, oh, we all know that Xantippe is this horrible person. So she talks about memory, and I'm just kind of moving on. She says, well, I remember bad days, but there were always also good days, and I remember my youth. And if you look at the at lines 33 onwards, where she talks about her relationship with the other girls in when she was young in Athens. What cared I for the merry mockeries of other maidens sitting at the loom? Put a pin in there, so the loom will come back as well. So the other maidens sitting at the loom, or 4 sharp voices bidding my return to maiden labor. Were we not apart, I and my high thoughts and my golden dreams, my soul which yearned for knowledge, for a tongue that should proclaim the stately mysteries of this fair world and of the holy gods. Then followed days of sadness as I grew to learn my woman mind had gone astray, and I was sinning in those very thoughts. For maidens mark such are not women's thoughts, and yet 'tis strange the gods who fashion us have given us such promptings. So in this early years of her life, she becomes aware of a conflict. And you might say this is a kind of a fairly cliched conflict, but then bear with me, and we're also in the 19th century. So she's other than the other girls. She thinks of bigger, she has bigger thoughts. She wants to find out about the gods and the, the fair world, but she is immediately drawn back to this world of femininity, where she's kind of, she has to sit at the loom, spin, and making chit chat with her girlfriends, I suppose. Now we could say, it's kind of tricky now because we know the kind of official story of Xantippe, but if we kind of not think about that in a moment, we could say, oh, great, she will now go on, marry Socrates, and can live a life of the mind. So what could be better? She has all these interests, and she's going to marry the most intelligent person in the world, or ever. As we move on to what I see as the second the second part of this poem, starting with fled the years till 17 had found me tall and strong. So she has grown up. She is now ready to get married. And she encounters Socrates for the first time. I saw him all ungainly and uncouth, yet many gathered round to hear his words, tall youth and stranger maidens, Socrates. I saw his face and marked it, half with awe, half with a quick repulsion at that shape. So I think it's very fairly typical reaction of a young girl. So she obviously wants to find the good-looking, tall, young husband, but for some reason she's already attracted to Socrates, and she overcomes her repulsion because he's not a beautiful man. He's older than her, but there's something in him that attracts her, which shows us again that she is not like the standard teenage girl. So she sees something deeper in him, or something pulls her towards it. And if we move down that page to line 78, this is after she has married, or after she has agreed that she will marry Socrates, and she's again not completely happy now. She says, but slowly, softly did I cease to weep. Slowly I began to mark the magic flash, leap up to the eyes, to watch the sudden smile break round the mouth and linger in the eyes. So there's something more to him. She sees the intelligent. She's no longer half repulsed by his face, but there's something in him, this kind of glimmer of his eye, the smile. And she continues to listen for the voice's lightest tone, great voice whose cunning modulation seemed like the notes of some sweet instrument. And I think this is important because she is not just moving beyond this kind of being fairly superficial and wanting an attractive husband to realizing that he is not only fascinating, but there is what she calls the great voice whose cunning modulation seemed like to the notes of some sweet instruments. So she's not just unconsciously attracted to him, but she realizes something deeper. So I think she's attracted to him here already on an intellectual level. So it's not just the flash in his eyes, but also his voice and what he has to say. Does anybody want to comment at this point already, or do you want me to just continue? So I'd be just interested in people's reactions. Okay, if not, I'll just go on. So she gets married, and a certain wistfulness comes in. So I've kind of jumped to line 103. I would pause and would recall no more of life than just the incomplete, imperfect dreams of early summers with their lights and shade, their blossom hopes whose fruit was never ripe, but something strong within me, some sad chord which loudly echoes to the life, me to unfold the after misery, urges with plaintive wailing in my heart. So the ambivalence is there. So we've got this idea that, yeah, I was kind of happy and things might have gone in the right direction, but there's always this chord. I should have noticed that, I should have realized that, but I didn't. Now, what happens now is a description of her relationship with Socrates at this stage. And it's how she tries to engage with him. And the situation is the following. Obviously, she has realized that he's this great intellectual, and she's not just kind of remaining in a state of awe and says, well, I have this clever husband, isn't it great? But she desperately tries to somehow not really become his equal, I suppose, but she wants to talk to him on an intellectual level. So she wants him to realize that she can be a partner in his endeavors. And this will become the really the tragedy of this dramatic monologue and the tragedy of Xanthippes' life as she tells us this. That would be line 170, sorry, no, 116. 'Twas only that the higher philosopher, pregnant with noble theories and great thoughts, deigned not to stoop to touch so slight a thing as fine a fabric of a woman's brain. So she wants him to engage with her intellectually, but he doesn't. But she's not returning to the, she's not saying, well, it just means that I'm not clever enough and, you know, women should just sit and spin. But she comes up, I think, with I don't know how to put it, a kind of she attempts to describe a feminine or female intellect. So she's not saying, I find this very interesting, she's not saying, oh, we're the same. You know, we have the same brain, we have the same intellectual capacities, and he just doesn't see that. But she talks about the fine fabric of a woman's brain. So I think it's an interesting thing to ponder. Is that self-deprecation? Is it accepting that women aren't just that clever? Or is she bringing in an alternative to masculine thinking? And this idea of the fabric will appear again and again in the poem. So and also, as I said earlier, that you should kind of keep in mind the loom. So we have her first being forced or being very strongly encouraged to spend her time weaving, or you weave at the loom, I suppose. So as this kind of engaging in this very feminine activity, hanging out with her girlfriends. And here she takes this idea of something that's quite domestic. So, you know, weaving, that's women's work. And you produce something that is fairly banal, it's useful, you know, you can make clothes out of it and blankets or whatever, but it's not exciting. It's really not on an intellectual level. But here she takes this idea and says, well, maybe the female brain is like a fine fabric that needs to be looked after, that is different from the more sturdy male thinking, perhaps. However, perhaps also not surprisingly, Socrates does not react the way she wants him to react. So she says, so subtle as a passionate woman's soul. So this is still the brain, that is still the fine fabric of the brain. It's subtle, and we will find out that it's too subtle, perhaps, for Socrates. I think if he had stooped a little, cared I might have risen nearer to his height, and not lain shattered, neither fit for use as goodly household vessels, nor for that far finer thing which I had hoped to be. And this comes up again and again, where she says, if only he had realized that I'm here, that I have different kinds of thinking. And she doesn't say, oh, he should have abased himself and really kind of talk to me in a slow way so that my, you know, little lady's brain understands him. She says, it's just a little. If he had just a little adjusted to my way of thinking, and one might say, okay, she never had a chance to think like Socrates because she doesn't have the training, but she has the potential. And she realizes that, but he just doesn't, he doesn't stoop to just stoop this little bit, which would have drawn her up. And then again, she returns to this idea of the household and the household things. She also does some foreshadowing that she will lay shattered, where she says she is then neither fit for use as goodly household vessel, nor for that far finer thing which I had hoped to be. So she said, or her dilemma is, she isn't useful, she's just useful, you know, as a pot or a dish, so something sturdy and normal, but tragically, she's also not special enough to be something else, or what she wants to be, or what she wants Socrates to see. She's caught in that dilemma. So not banal enough to be a useful pot, but also not exalted enough to be Socrates's equal, or at least encourage him to stoop a little. This idea is then taken up again in a very, I think, very touching metaphor, and that's line 133. As first I fought my fate with gentle words, with high endeavors of greater things, striving to win the soul of Socrates. So again, what she's trying to do. And then the metaphor comes, or it's a simile, sorry, like some slight bird who sings her burning love to human master, till at length she finds her tender language wholly misconceived, and that same hand whose kind caress she sought with fingers flippant flings the careless corn. So she is the bird who just can't talk to the human. And again, coming back to this idea of fragility, but also a strong urge to do something, but it just doesn't work because they just don't speak the same language. And now we come to what I mentioned earlier, is this, this central episode. And this is where this anecdote of Xantippe spilling something, be it kind of the contents of a night pot or just wine, comes in. So we now go from this kind of general thinking about the past, reflecting on her relationship or failing relationship with Socrates. We now come to a very concrete story. And she says, I do remember one summer's eve, he seated in an arbor's leafy shade, he bade me bring fresh wineskins. So she's a good housewife, she has to go and bring some drinks. And she has to do that because Socrates is hanging out with his friends. And they're all male, they're all philosophers, or at least deep thinkers. As I stood lingering upon the threshold, half concealed by tender foliage, my spirit light with draughts of sunny weather did I mark an instant the gay group before mine eyes. And I find this scene very touching and very cleverly done. So she's standing there, looking at this group of men who are having a good time, and she's half hidden, and she's standing on the threshold, and she wants to go in there, and she probably understands quite a lot what they are saying, and she's hidden in the foliage again. So again, she's almost like, again, the bird, or this, I don't know if you could say, kind of this idea of the woman connected to nature, but she doesn't want to do that. She's standing here with her wine, looking at the men. And she sees Plato, who's sitting there with his calm face and low brows, which met above the narrow Grecian eyes, his pale thin lips just parted to the smile, which dimpled that smooth olive of his cheeks. And there's Socrates, and I like that because she describes him as with one sword finger raised admonishing, and on the air were born his changing tones. So he's really sitting there and kind of, kind of making fun now, this kind of typical mansplaining situations with his finger up, and he's explaining important things to important people. And this comes back again a bit later on. And then there's another man hanging out, and that is Alcibiades, who is famous for his good looks, and he's described in a kind of more sensual way. So that is two older guys, and then this very, very attractive younger guy is kind of flying around, and then she overhears what they're talking about. And Socrates is talking about Pericles' wife Aspasia, who is supposed to be a prophetess, or at least a very, very learned woman. So we've got these three guys talking about a woman who's not there. And Socrates says, this fair Aspasia, which our Pericles has brought from realms afar and set on high in our Athenian city, has a mind, I doubt not, of a strength beyond her race, and makes employ of it beyond the way of women nobly gifted. So she's kind of clever, and I kind of agree. She's, it's very unusual for a woman to be that clever. Woman's frail, her body rarely stands the test of soul. She grows intoxicated with knowledge, throws the laws of custom order neath her feet, feasting a life's great banquet with wide throat. So he's saying women are just overcome by their bodies in a kind of metaphorical sense. They cannot hold on to a thought. Too much learning is just too much for their little lady brain, and all they can do is indulge in physical pleasures. And again, if you imagine the scene, he says that, and his wife, who is desperately trying to prove to him that she has something to say, overhears that, and can no longer just sit there, to stand there half hidden in her foliage, but steps forward with the wineskin over her head, with breasts that heaved and eyes and cheeks aflame, lit by a fury and a thought, I spoke. So she's angry, and she has a thought, and she has to say that now because she can no longer hold that in. And she says, by all great powers around it, can it be that we poor women are empirical? But that she means, well, maybe we learn things or experience the world through experiences. And I think she's questioning, she's kind of putting a new reading on what Socrates has just said. So Socrates is saying, well, they're all body, and then it takes over, and then things go wrong. She says, well, maybe that's the thing. That's how we women experience the world, and maybe this is how we think, or this is our entrance into a world of thinking and the intellect. And she goes on, that gods who fashioned us did strive to make beings too fine, too subtly delicate, with sense that thrilled response to every touch of nature, a touch of nature's, and their task is not complete. So again, the fragility, and her trying to come to terms with, why are we women so fragile? Isn't there a point behind it? So why did the gods do that? That they have sent their half-completed work to bleed and quiver here upon the earth, to bleed and quiver and to weep, to beat its soul against the marble walls of men's cold hearts, and then at least to sin. So she says, maybe it's our fragility, maybe it's the unfairness that we have been put on earth to be so fragile and to be feeling so much, and also on a physical level, and that is what makes us sin, which is kind of linking back to Socrates talking about women's wide throats. So if we kind of think about that in sexual terms, she says, maybe it's that. Maybe it's not that we're inferior. Maybe the way we have been unfairly shaped by the gods has made us that way. And now we have another great description, because we have this three men staring at this woman, appearing infuriated, holding the wineskins by this point over her head, and shouting at them. And then we have another description of these two men. So earlier on, she has talked about Plato and she talked about his narrow Grecian eyes. So it is kind of, I think we get the sense of it's like a classical statue, and his eyes are not kind of huge and manga-like, but they're, I don't know, balanced and handsome. And these narrow Grecian eyes become narrow eyes, which is no longer that attractive, I would say. And his calm face and the low brows become a niggard mouth, which half did smile and half did criticize. One hand held up, the shapely fingers framed to gesture of entreaty. Hush, I pray, do not disturb her. Let us hear the rest. Follow her mood, for here's another face of pure black-browed centipede. So again, and I think what she now describes is this kind of weirdly brutal man saying, fine, you know, you tell us what you think. And she continues, also young Alcibiades, who is now still attractive and laughing, and but has a contemptuous shrugging up soft snowy shoulders till he brought the gold of flowing ringlets round about his breasts. So he's still a beautiful man, but his whole demeanor is making fun of her. So I think she now experienced this group of three men that are really closing ranks, if you want so. So she's the stupid girl, these three men are the cool boys. And she can no longer hold it in, especially after, and sorry, I kind of jumped the person, and her husband doesn't defend her. But her husband says, I thank thee for the wisdom with thy lips have thus fall amongst us. Prithee tell from what high source, from what philosophers didst cull the sapient notion of thy words. So he's really pulling, if you want so, the male philosophers. Yeah, so he's kind of using that. So he knows obviously exactly that she doesn't have this knowledge. She hasn't been trained, and he points that out. And this is the moment where she cracks, and this is where the pouring of liquids finally comes in, and that is line 210. Then I stood straight and silent for a breath, dumb, crushed with all that weight of cold contempt. But swiftly in my bosom there arose a sudden flame, a merciful fury sent to save me. With both angry hands I flung the skin upon the marble where it lay, spouting red rills and fountains on the white. Okay, now this is for me the center of the poem. It's very cleverly done. I mean, I said that earlier, and I think even repeatedly, it's Xanthopy spilling something. And here it's the wine. And I think now you can kind of put on different readings or levels to that. So obviously that's the wine she was supposed to bring to her husband and his friends, as you know, in her role of a hostess, wife. That's what you're supposed to, kind of offering drinks. She fails in that because she just kind of let the skins fall down and wine is everywhere. And I also, and obviously there's also metaphorical reading to that. And I like what I find very interesting is the opposites here. So it's skin to marble. It's the wineskins, but I think she drops, or Levy drops the fact that it is this household good, but it becomes skin. So I think at this point one could metaphorically read it as human skin or sensuality or a way of experiencing the world, which Xanthopy has just a couple of lines earlier called empirical, and it clashes with the white marble. This is an image that has come up earlier as well, this idea that she's somehow held in or kept away by the marble, white, masculine, hard way of thinking and living, I suppose. And the red wine, obviously, I think stands for, again, kind of blood, kind of something that can't be controlled. So again, a physicality or a bodiliness, as opposed to the rational thinking of the male philosophers. Now, after this climax, she runs away. And we are now moving into the last, or the kind of the final parts of the poem. And we are now coming finally to the loom and the fabrics that are spun. So she comes back, and that's the lines. Let's start at line, what's that? Sorry, I'm kind of getting really blind. 235. A huge despair was stealing on my soul, a sort of fierce acceptance of my fate. He wished a household vessel. So she comes back to this idea of the domestic. Early on, she said, or she kind of thought about her dilemma of her as a shattered vessel, a vessel that is no longer useful. And now she says, okay, I'll be a vessel then. Well, 'twas good, for he should have it. He should have no more the yearning treasure of a woman's love, but just the baser treasure which he sought. I called the maidens, ordered out the loom. And now there comes a passage which I find fascinating. I called my maidens, ordered out the loom, and spun unceasing from the morn till eve, watching all keenly over wrap and woof, weighing the white wool with a jealous hand. I spun until methinks I spun away the soul from out my body, the high thoughts from out my spirit, till at last I grew as you have known me, eye exact to mark the texture of the spinning, ear all keen for aimless talking when the moon is up, and you should be a sleeping tongue to cut with quick incision toward the merry words of idle maidens. And I find that so interesting, the way she says, okay, I'll be domestic then, but her deeply domestic task of spinning takes on this manic nature. So to say, I spun away, what did you say? I spun away the soul from my body and the high thoughts from my spirit. So she's not just giving in. She's not kind of submerging into passivity or depression, but she's in a way going crazy, doing this domestic task. So one could perhaps say she's reappropriating that. And I'm not an expert in spinning or weaving, but as far as I know, spinning is normally, if you talk about not something spinning, but a person spinning at a loom or spin wheel, getting confused, I think is a very regular thing to do. So you can't kind of do crazy things while you're spinning. So you have to keep a certain rhythm in order to produce a fine and regular thread. But she takes that and she's just madly spinning. And this radicalization of the domestic, I find just extremely interesting. So she goes from, okay, I'll try to show him this fabric, this frail, fragile way of my thinking and my fragility that is there, but if he just kind of stoops a little bit, to okay, I'm just going mad while spinning, and this will show it. So I'm not passive while doing domesticity, but I kind of completely turn it around. And also in a way, I suppose she also turns the spinning into something useless. It's just whirling around, I suppose. Okay, so sorry. So this is the story of her life. She explains to us, to the reader, why she is the way she is, and that is bad-tempered and shrewish, and she likes telling people off. And she jumps into the present. And that's the last two paragraphs, really. So starting with only yesterday, my hands did cease from spinning. I have wrought my dreary duties, patient till the last. So she says, this is the end of my life. I've stopped spinning. She then kind of thinks back on her husband's death. And it's just a very kind of small little remark where she reminds us, or she remembers that she wasn't there. So there's another important episode in Socrates' life, or the end of this life, which he's famous for and which shows his moral fortitude. And she kind of does this throwaway remark that I wasn't there for this big last moment. And then we really move towards the end of the poem. And as I said, I didn't really come up with a title for the very last 5 lines, which starts with, Ha, the dawn has come. I see a rosy glimmer, nay, it grows dark. Why stand ye so in silence? Throw it wide, the casement. Quick, why tarry? Give me air, or fling it wide, I say, and give me light. Which is kind of going back to the beginning, but with a twist. Right, and I would just be very interested what people think about that. What people think about the poem, which I've now, I think, galloped through. Yeah, there is, sorry, Anne, is that, yeah.
Yes. Well, I think maybe she just demands that now she gets a period in her life with light, you know, that she can decide that after having suffered through this repression, she now wants her time and the light and the air, but it's questionable whether she gets it.
Mm.
I mean, she says, why is it getting dark again? Or why are you tarrying? Why are you not giving me this space that, in my opinion, I deserve?
Yeah, I would also kind of put a spin on it. I think that she's now ironically, or maybe not ironically, seeing her death as her way to find light. Which again, perhaps one could say, okay, she's turned something around again. So maybe she is now realized, or maybe she probably has realized it for the longest time, that in life she has not achieved that, which she now achieves in death. And I was kind of thinking, you know, this idea, has she committed suicide, or is she trying to commit suicide, which obviously then also plays with the idea that her husband famously committed suicide. Is that the last act of freedom, or the ultimate act of empowerment? Because you're taking away what normally, you know, you do the most radical thing you might be able to do.
Sure, and that would bind in with the beginning.
Mm-hmm.
That surprise that she's still alive.
Mm-hmm.
I just wondered how the Greek imagined death to be, because I don't know, with the whole light thing, is that death?
I'm not a classical philologist, I'm afraid. I mean, I think that there would be the sense of a heroic death, which she as a woman shouldn't be able to experience. I don't know if anyone else has any other takes.
Well, with the Greeks, death is this wandering into the valley of the shades. So completely different concept from anything that a Christian belief system would endorse, support, or in its imagery voice similarly. The strange association that I have, but that may be because you mentioned the Civil War earlier. Thomas Bailey Aldrich wrote about the Civil War, was a war correspondent at some time. This throwing it wide. Okay, there's the casement, and I'm not quite sure what the casement is supposed to be in this context. But other than that, it sounds as if somebody had given her a live grenade, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and you try to get rid of that.
Yeah.
So this idea of throw it wide, fling it wide, you know, get rid of this thing, any direction, you know, as long as it's away.
Mm-hmm.
And then supposedly there's light there, but I think it hinges on our interpretation of casement.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the casement is especially interesting. You know, first I was thinking of like the very strange Christian interpretation of the gates ajar, you know, that she's basically dying and seeing the eternal light. There's definitely a part of that here, but the casement is an interesting concept, hard to figure out.
Yeah, no, I think I like the idea of the hand grenade. I'm not sure whether Levy really thought about that, because it's deadly, but it also, I mean, there's also an explosion and light.
Well, less so a hand grenade, but you get these in the Civil War, what looks like solid shot, so round ball, but with burning fuse.
Mm-hmm.
And these things sometimes exploded and sometimes they didn't.
Mm-hmm.
And if something like that landed within your ranks or in your trench, you try to get it out, throw it out there, and hope it would explode not exactly in your hands.
Mm-hmm.
So the concept of hand grenades is a bit different. That would be First World War. This is for that it's too early.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, as I said, I really like the images of domesticity she plays with. And first, the loom stands for banal girlhood, really, where all the girls sit and they make fun and they talk about boys, probably. And then we kind of move through her life, and at the end, the loom becomes this manic thing. And the same with the vessel. I like the idea that you are a failed vessel, which I suppose is really the ultimate failure. You're neither the exciting, high-strung, special person, neither are you the useful person. You're just, you know, a shattered vessel. You're useful, you're a useless vessel. And then also taking this idea also when she talks about the wineskins, which also go from something hospitable and domestic to something that is thrown and tarnishes the white marble. So maybe that's also has, you know, hand grenade throwing things, and you get, I think, a burst. So I don't think she really thinks about hand grenades or whatever when she talks about the wineskins. But again, this idea of a very strong physical thing happening that is both destruction, but also in a way liberating, or at least changing things, at least for a moment. Anna has her hand up again.
Yeah, I was just wondering, what if she's talking about, you know, throwing wide the windows or the balcony, and so in order that she can jump, you know, if we're talking about, and then also shattering, you know, and then not only symbolically have a shattered vessel, but a shattered body as well. So.
Okay, if there are no other remarks on Xantippe, I would just shortly turn to some, well, it's 2 or 3 other poems by Levy, which are extremely different. So I think here we move from perhaps a quite Victorian, you know, dramatic monologue to something that, to my eyes, is much more modern. And I think this is also something interesting about Levy, that for me, she's this liminal figure. So she's at the threshold to modernism. And again, one could speculate what would have happened with her. I mean, would she have become one of the early great modernists if she had lived a little bit longer? So I think now I've given away my great thing, but let me just again show you something. Okay, so we've got still. Now, here I start with something that we're all familiar with and something that is well outside the Victorian period. And this is the famous beginning and an early passage from Virginia Woolf's Mrs. Dalloway. So you can't get more modernist than that, I would argue. And I would just draw your attention to the second, longer paragraph. For having lived in Westminster for how many years now? Over 20. One feels, even in the midst of the traffic or waking at night, Clarissa was positive, a particular hush or solemnity, an indescribable pause, a suspense, but that might be her heart affected, they said, by influenza, before Big Ben strikes. There, out it boomed, first the warning musical, then the hour irrevocable. The leaden circles dissolved in the air. Such fools we are, she thought, crossing Victoria Street. For heaven only knows why one loves it so, how one sees it so, making it up, building it around one, tumbling it, creating it every moment fresh. And then I have another slide, bit earlier than Mrs. Dalloway. In the station of the metro, the apparition of these faces in the crowd paddles on a wet black bow. Famous poem, haiku, by Ezra Pound, and again, one of the key texts for modernism. If you teach modernism, this is what you show students. And then, I do not have another slide. Sorry. And then we have those three short poems by Levy, and especially The London Plane Tree and the Ballad of an Omnibus, obviously, Ballad of an Omnibus. And here I really see her moving into modernism. So she takes a vision of the city and this London, and really turns it around in a way I would associate with later poets. And again, these are very, I mean, as I said, they're very, very different from Xantippe. So these are very simple poems, especially The London Plane Tree. There's nothing, you know, language-wise, there's nothing too exciting going on. It's a very humdrum scene. So maybe just read through it. A London plane tree. Green is the plane tree in the square. The other trees are brown. They droop and pine for country air. The plane tree loves the town. Here from my garret pane I mark the plane tree bud and blow, shed her recuperative bark and spread her shade below. Among her branches, in and out, the city breezes play. The dun fog wraps her round about, above the smoke curls grey. Others the country take for choice and hold the town in scorn, but she has listened to the voice on city breezes born. Okay, remarks on that.
It's fairly conventional rhyming and rhythm, isn't it?
Yep. So I would say it's deceptively easy or simple.
Mm-hmm.
So she takes obviously, and also I mean the opposition. So it's town versus country, but the city becomes the thing she celebrates in a way. And what I think interesting here is that the city is not destroying nature, but there's one bit of nature that loves the town. And what I also find interesting is that the plane tree is not really fighting for its life. So it's not this idea that, oh, there's this one tree and there's hope even in the horrible kind of smelly, foggy, grey town of London. But it's a tree that ironically thrives in the city air. And if we think about, and as I said, I see Levy as this threshold figure. If we think about that, this is something that comes up later. The chances the big city give to women And Levy is also very often associated with the so-called new woman. So this early emancipated women who go out into the workforce, who are not these fragile creatures that should kind of stay at home or in the country house or wherever, but they venture out and they achieve something. And you could link that to one of Levy's prose works, and that's The Romance of a Shop. I think The Romance, even just the title, is as deceptively easy, but also ironic, like the London Plane Tree poem. So The Romance of a Shop is about a group of sisters whose parents die, and they have to make a living for themselves, and they open a photography studio. And it's again this, I think, this twist that something that could be destructive, that could be disastrous, that kind of, a group of women alone in the city, who knows what's going to happen to them, just like this tree alone in the city, kind of very likely to die. But the city is the environment that helps them to thrive. And the other poem I mentioned is the Ballad of an Omnibus, which in a more jokingly way takes the idea of the city as something positive, where we've got a lyrical eye riding the omnibus and enjoying it immensely, because she sees all what is going on in London. She sees all the people. And in a way, I mean, it might be a bit far-fetched, well, not far-fetched, but I like the idea. In a way, those two London poems with the plane tree and also the life of the lyrical eye sees when she's moving about in her omnibus, the faces, the people. In a way, one might be able to link that to the Ezra Pound short haiku, this idea that you have a cityscape, and in it you have the bustle of people, and they become something poetic. So again, I think that Levy, in a way, is foreshadowing modernism. In a way, I think one could argue that. And as I said, it is very interesting to speculate what would have become of her work if she had lived until 60, 70 or anything like that. I think that's all from me. I hope you enjoyed it, but very happy for any further remarks. I can very much recommend reading also Levy's prose work. But yeah, any questions or remarks?
Yeah, thank you very much. That was interesting. I'm just still thinking about, the phaeton is like a vehicle, and the omnibus is also a vehicle. It's something very democratic somehow, isn't it?
Yeah.
So in a sense, I want to travel together with the whole rest of the people, and also the common people. I mean, I know the omnibus is something that Henry James also writes about in some short stories, as the only the plebs are using the omnibus, the lower class kind of people. So this is also an interesting kind of working class almost connection, possibly, that she's making.
I think there's a whole this idea of the city is both unsafe, because you can't control who you encounter in a city, in a big city.
Exactly. Yeah.
But it's, this might be dangerous, especially one could say for women, because as I said, all things might happen, but it's also exciting. And I think there's this idea of as you said, an equality or democratization of the city space that is, empowering, especially for middle class women. So this idea, I'm going out, I might work. There's a whole body of novels that deal with this question. So how should women work? And it's not just about, it's exciting and empowering, but what is a safe thing for women to work? And towards the end of the 19th century, I think we have this development of new jobs. So you could work, for example, in an office or in a shop. So you're no longer having to or not being forced to choose. So either you are safe as a daughter or a wife, or if your parents completely fail and die and there's no money left, you have, for example, to work as a governess. So you have that the tension in a lot of texts, and the city or the city becomes more modern. Becomes this space where you can live an independent life, but still earn your keep in jobs that allow you to work and then come back. And I wrote my PhD thesis on Dorothy Richardson, who wrote a 13-volume long novel called Pilgrimage. And it's basically, I always say, if she had just called, well, the volumes have different titles, but if she would have just changed the main character, one would think it's great. It's earlier, it's free in discourse, it's earlier than Virginia Woolf. But the 13 volumes deal with one main character, and she experienced that. So she falls on hard time, has to work as a governess, is completely unhappy. But then she moves into London and has some humdrum. I think she's a secretary for a dentist, which is really not an exciting thing to be. But there is great passages in there which remind me a lot of the Ballad of an Omnibus, where she just looks at London and London envelops her, and she opens the door and all the smog and the smells and the noise comes in, but she enjoys it and it frees her. So I think there's a nice connection there, and this, I think, kind of very exciting discourse, or I find very interesting discourse of what happens to women in the late 19th century, early 20th century.
I think it's also interesting that, how curious she is and how she wants to explore this, the city pageant. She wants to get that view. I'm just, this is the opposite of a Henry James, who basically, gives us a whole list of dangers.
Yeah.
The American girl in Henry James is always in danger. She's also free, but he cares a lot. He tries to protect her and it doesn't work. Sort of, or he lists all the dangers, of this world, and I don't see here in this poem any danger. I see,
And also with the plane tree is not struggling.
Exactly. Yeah. That's fascinating. That's an interesting perspective. That is, we could weigh the male perspectives and the female perspectives and see different attitudes here.
Yeah, I mean, there's this whole thing about the flaneur, are there female flaneurs? Which I think kind of comes in, well, not here, but there's also this idea, how is the city experienced? There's great work done, this idea that women go about the city, they have to do something, so they go shopping or kind of, ride an omnibus, but it's still this kind of free movement through the city space.
Which is, of course, quintessential modernism, because of the technology, the vehicle, that kind of stuff,
Yeah.
Okay. Anne, did you want to say something? I think I saw a hand here.
Yes, I wanted to add something too. I really like those poems, and I found it interesting, this feminine voice to describe the city, and also, it's a kind of very subtle and blending in, and not nothing fancy, I mean, you don't have the phaeton, but you have the omnibus, and it's trying not to give away too much presence of them, you know, totally different from a male perspective, where here I am and more aggressively. So it's they're trying to blend in, but they're still there. They're hiding in plain sight. I mean, like this unobtrusive tree that is, it's brown and it's gray, but it's still green and it's there and it's absolutely thriving. So I really like that. I mean, there's a lot of humor in it as well. I thought, and a kind of a lightness in the voice, you know, the way it's freeing. You can feel their freedom, you know, to move about, to have their own life, to find their space in the city. So
Okay.
That was very basic in a sense, but very, very important, very interesting, and also these early roots of modernism. You know, I think this is absolutely fascinating.
Mm.
I really like that. I like that. Thank you. Any other
No, thank you.
comments? Or I hope I didn't confuse you too much by, you know, marking on my copy here. It's just, you know, you suddenly see words and they stick out. And the omnibus is an interesting thing anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah. I wouldn't know that much about its history and or its cultural history, you know, how people have written about the omnibus as a new experience, you know. Yeah. Public transportation.
Yeah.
It started somewhere.
I think Wolfgang, you worked on trains, right? Or am I completely wrong?
No, I've done work on trains on the American stage, and I mean trains, and I mean stage. So
Yeah.
that ranged from having cardboard and wood contraptions carried across the stage, making puffing noises in the 1860s, to makeshift theater set up near the roundhouse and then folding the wings back and having a real train run through the theater in the 1890s. So an omnibus on a stage would have been
Much easier.
sure, of course, you know. By your leave, that type of thing.
But off the stage, I think I really like this idea of a cultural history of
Ballad of an
traffic in the city, because
Ballad of an Omnibus sounds vaguely Monty Pythonish, you know. But I guess it's serious. I mean, who would have known? Omnibus at that time, of course, would have been a horse-drawn coach, possibly on rails, going through a city.
But it's very different from, you know, the train is the idea, you know, you kind of conquer the American West by trains.
No, the omnibus basically goes in circles.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right.
Has its pre-configured route and will come back at some point. Yeah, that's an interesting one. I think I'll hold on to that one.
Thank you for sharing.
Thank you for inviting me.
Okay, anybody else who still, you know, has an important issue or a question? And now I know another name, another interesting writer. What is her prose like? You know, you said she also wrote novels.
The Romance of a Shop is very enjoyable and light and bubbly. Other things are darker. So Ruben Sachs, I think it's that's an interesting one, because she deals with the question of Anglo Jews, and it's very much kind of in the, I think, tradition of Daniel Deronda, and she's I don't know whether she's conflicted, but kind of her coming from a Jewish family, so she's Jewish and she's very aware of her Jewish identity, and then grappling with all the stereotypes and sometimes buying into the stereotypes, I find also very interesting. So I think she has all these, you know, things she's interested in. So, you know, the city, femininity, women's movement, Jewish identity, women in higher education. So yes, I like her prose very much, and she also has these little sketches, which, you know, we might again connect to urbanity. So this kind of impressions she writes about, and I think it's just fascinating that she does all these things. I don't think she wrote any plays, but otherwise everything is there. And she started incredibly young. I mean, she was 19 or 20 when she wrote Dixon-Tippy one.
Mm-hmm. Which is amazing.
Yeah.
A teenager.
Yeah.
Think about it. Wow. Yeah, it's very impressive. Very impressive. Okay, so thank you very much, Kerstin, for introducing us to this really interesting new writer for us.
Yeah, I think she deserves more.
She deserves more attention.
Yeah.
Obviously, you have to teach a class about her sometime.
That would be great.
You know, that would be great. That would be great. That would be interesting. You know, and good stuff. Okay.
Then.
So in that case, thank you very much for entertaining us and presenting us so many interesting things. Thank you for all of my students who attended and paid attention. I hope I'm going to see all of you again next week. Okay, so we're going to have another presentation from Basel next week, and that is very probably also going to be very exciting. So I really look forward to that. Anyway, thank you, everybody. I see you again next week.
Thank you. Bye.
Take care.